Sawasdee krab.
Sawasdee ka. Good morning and welcome to Newsline. It's Monday, April 20th of 2009. You're with me, Cholapansa Narula.
And I'm Edward Ensko. In today's top stories, we'll be taking a look at the aftermath of the street protests by the Red Shirt group, as well as local banks' new efforts to help their customers.
And also coming up later on the program, we have our interview with a political analyst, Kun Suranan Wechachiwa, who will be commenting on issues including the failed assassination attempt of media mogul Kun Sonthi Limthongkul and also the Red Shirt movement.
And stay tuned for the latest in the world of sports with Kun Mark Atip Sunthorn Sawat. First though, let's start off the day with Bangkok Today. So, Kun Cholapansa, were you following all of the activities that were happening last week with the Red Shirts?
Closely, because I was in Bangkok. Didn't decide to go anywhere, following the movements, of course. But let's move on to the stories now. Prime Minister Appisit Wechachiwa has given political parties 2 weeks to propose amendments to the constitution, which will help diffuse tensions, he says. Kun Appisit yesterday said the effort to get people talking could address the political conflicts which drove people onto the streets and into committing violence. The proposals would be put to the public for debate. Kun Appisit said he was open to changing a provision of the Constitution on political wrongdoing. Now, the controversial Article 237 deals with the dissolution of political parties.
Yes, the provision calls for the dissolution of a party if its leader or executive members are found guilty of electoral fraud. All executives of the party are banned from politics for 5 years should the provision be invoked. Now, Kun Appisit said there should be a distinction between political wrongdoing and criminal charges such as rioting, corruption and abuse of power. He also defended his own government's imposition of emergency rule and the legal action taken against protest leaders in the wake of the violence over Songkran. He said security authorities had not applied double standards when dealing with the People's Alliance for Democracy and the United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship protests. According to him, arrest warrants were sought against people who declared that they will continue fighting. Some of them even say their operations would be clandestine. Now, this is an obvious threat to national security.
He also said the measures were being taken to restore peace and allow the government to tackle real problems, which include the economic downturn and unemployment. Dissolving the House now was unlikely to solve any problem as long as there remains social divisions. Kun Appisit's call for charter amendments, especially to the contentious provisions, was welcomed by his coalition partners and Pheu Thai Party as well. Sanan Krachon Prasad of Chat Thai Patana said Kun Appisit's approach left the door open for negotiation, which was welcome. While Kun Chumpon Silapa Acha, leader of Chat Thai Patana, suggested that the Election Commission and the Supreme Court get involved in considering an amnesty for party executives who were not involved in electoral fraud. Pheu Thai MP for Yasothon Pirapan Palasuk said the party agreed with the charter amendments and thought the process should not take more than 2 months. He believed 2 charter amendments and 2 fresh elections should be enough to mend social divisions.
Now, Kun Tosapon Seri Rak, a banned executive in the Thai Rak Thai Party, welcomed the proposed changes to the charter, but said the cases against deposed former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra should also be reviewed. He said the Ratchadapisak land trial, in which Kun Thaksin was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in prison, came about as a result of the 2006 coup d'etat. He said investigators of the dissolved Asset Scrutiny Committee had been appointed by the coup makers and some of them were biased.
Right, moving on, the Department of Special Investigation is ready to look into the way the government dispersed Red Shirt protesters during last week's Songkran holidays. Deputy Permanent Secretary for Justice Kun Chan Chao Chayanukit, who supervises the DSI, said the department would act on any complaint about the crackdown. The opposition Pheu Thai Party is expected to formally ask the DSI to step in today. Pheu Thai spokesman Prampong Noparit said the party's complaint Centre had received 52 complaints about people who were injured or disappeared and damage caused during the army and police crackdown on the Red Shirt United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship in Dindang as well.
Yes, the complainant said 7 people were missing and 23 injured. The party's legal team was gathering information about the deaths and injuries and drafting complaints. The party would file a complaint with the DSI today, asking it to investigate the crackdown on UDD demonstrators in the Dindang area on April the 13th. It would also file a complaint with the Royal Thai Police Office and petition the House Committee on Justice and Human Rights on Wednesday. Mr. Prompong said the party would submit evidence, including documents about the Prime Minister's order to disperse the demonstrators, to the National Anti-Corruption Commission.
Meanwhile, Pheu Thai MP and UDD leader Jatuporn Phompan said yesterday he would head 300,000 red shirt protesters to surrender to police. Mr. Jatuporn, who has not turned himself into police after the red shirts called off their protests at Government House last Tuesday, asked National Police Chief Hacharawat Wongsuwan to set a date and venue for him and other UDD members to surrender. The remaining UDD leaders facing arrest warrants and all UDD protesters numbering about 300,000 would show up and mass to surrender once they had a date and time. Mr. Jatuporn challenged Army Chief General Anupong Paujinda to hang himself at Sanam Luang if the Pheu Thai party was able to prove that red shirt demonstrators were killed in the military crackdown. General Anupong has denied claims troops killed rioters and took their bodies away in trucks.
Yes, the Army chief added that he would back his assertion with his life that troops did not take extreme action against red shirts and only stepped in to restore order. Now, Deputy Metropolitan Police Chief Kun Amnoy yesterday said security officers had arrested 19 red shirt demonstrators since the government declared its state of emergency. They've been taken to the Addison military camp in Sarakburi for interrogation, with Dindang police also taking part in the questioning of the suspects.
Now, local banks want the Bank of Thailand to consider reducing the industry's contributions to the Deposit Protection Agency, or DPA, in order to reduce their costs and give them more room to lend. Lower costs could also open the way for more interest rate adjustments by commercial banks to help consumers or customers in a tough economy, said Kun Apisak Tantiwarawong, who was chairman of the Thai Bankers Association. He said banks would have more flexibility to either reduce lending rates or increase deposit rates. Now, this would ease the burden of borrowers and also help support savers. Commercial banks have been criticized for not cutting lending rates significantly, even as the central bank has made a series of reductions in its benchmark rate, currently at 1.25%.
Yes, according to Kun Apisak, he says that unofficially they've talked about the proposal with the Bank of Thailand, and they've discussed that it would benefit the country's economy overall. If the central bank allows a lower contribution rate, banks' interest rates would be adjusted in proportion. Now, the Deposit Protection Act currently requires each bank to pay contributions at 0.4% of their deposits to the Deposit Protection Agency under the central bank. Act leaves open the possibility of a rate adjustment at the agency's discretion. Kun Apisak maintained that banking interest rates had been reduced in line with the policy rate reductions. The industry has marginal space for rate moves. Current spreads are narrow. In any case, he said monetary policy at the moment has little influence on the country's economic growth. Despite a lending rate decline, loan demand remains slow. That's because of the weak economy.
Two major banks, Siam Commercial Bank and Kasikorn Bank, announced modest cuts in their lending rates last week, SCB by 0.1 percentage points and K-Bank by 0.15 points. Minimum lending rates of the country's six largest banks are currently quoted in the range of 6 to 6.5% per year. Minimum overdraft rates at 6.25 to 6.75% and minimum retail rate 6.5 to 7%.
Now, taking a look at the recent political uprising over the past 2 weeks in which protesters claimed they were fighting for true democracy, we now have a special report from the National News Bureau of Thailand, or NNT.